Have you ever wondered why certain content reaches you at the exact moment when something inside begins to change? None of this is coincidence. This video doesn't appear on your screen by chance. It is a calling, a silent reminder that something within you has already begun to awaken. Most people still live within a collective dream, believing the world is exactly as they were taught. But those who arrive here feel that something is wrong with this narrative. They feel the invisible weight of repetition, of routine, of control disguised as normality. Throughout history, few have dared to question the system that shapes perceptions, that dictates what is possible and what is not. And those who dared discovered that reality is far more malleable than it seems. The Matrix is not fiction. It is a field of vibration that limits the reach of human consciousness. It teaches us to doubt the invisible, to discredit our own intuition, and to believe we are merely bodies trying to survive. But those who awaken realize that life goes far beyond matter. This video is not just another piece of content about spirituality. It is a deep investigation into the hidden workings of consciousness, a dive into the vision of one of the greatest explorers of the mind and cosmos, who understood how energy, the body, and thought interact with the unified field of the universe. Itzhak Bentov left a map, and within it lies a common ground between science and mysticism, the certainty that consciousness is the foundation of everything. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you is already tired of the repetitions, the ready-made answers, the beliefs that tighten your chest and shrink your spirit. What follows may destabilize certainties, but it can also liberate your perception. It is an invitation to question everything, including the very concept of reality. And once your eyes are opened, there is no turning back. At a certain point in the human journey, a silent discomfort begins to manifest. It doesn't come from outside, but from the heart itself, like a subtle signal that the presented reality no longer satisfies. Everything seems to continue the same: work, routines, conversations, but inside something shifts. The individual feels they are participating in a game whose rules they don't fully understand. Bentov used to say this is the most delicate moment in the journey of consciousness, the instant when the being begins to perceive that the world around them is merely a reflection of mental patterns carefully structured to keep perception limited. The discomfort intensifies when the gaze turns inward. It is at this point that human beings begin to notice how much they live automatically, repeating inherited patterns, responding to predictable stimuli, seeking approval and fleeing rejection. The social system transforms conditioning into virtue, and conformity into balance. Bentov observed that humanity was trained to think within a narrow band of mental frequency, where fear, scarcity, and competition became the invisible foundations of survival. This low-vibration field is what keeps consciousness asleep, imprisoned in a fragmented perception of reality. The scientist and mystic saw in this collective slumber the reflection of a perceptive matrix, an energetic mesh sustained by beliefs that shape how each being interprets the universe. Everything taught from childhood builds the labyrinth of the mind, and the more the individual believes they know the world, the further they move from what truly is. When conditioning breaks, even for an instant, a crack of light emerges, revealing that reality may not be as solid as it seems. Awakening begins at this breaking point. It is not an act of rebellion, but a natural movement of consciousness seeking to expand. Bentov said that awakening doesn't happen from outside in. It propagates like a wave born at the center of being and reaches the body, heart, and thought. When this wave manifests, the body responds. The heart rhythm changes, the mind quiets for moments, and a new perception begins to form. Restlessness ceases to be discomfort and transforms into deep curiosity, as if something within calls the individual to discover an ancient, forgotten truth. This is the first step in the journey of liberation, the moment when the soul recognizes it has always been observing, even when it believed it was merely living. From there, consciousness initiates a process of realignment, seeking to understand the subtle laws governing perception itself. Bentov dedicated his life to exploring these laws, and his discoveries showed that consciousness is not generated by the brain but is the field the brain merely translates. This understanding changes everything, and it is precisely at this point that the journey of expansion begins to touch the territory of the physics of consciousness. When Itzhak Bentov began investigating the internal workings of the body during meditation, he realized he was facing something that completely challenged the traditional view of science. He discovered that consciousness does not originate in the brain but uses it as an instrument of vibrational translation. The mind does not produce consciousness. It only captures and interprets frequencies from a field that permeates everything. It's as if the brain were a cosmic radio and thought, the music it plays. The problem is that most people remain tuned to a single station, the dense frequencies of survival, fear, and separation. Bentov realized that during deep meditative states, the human body transforms into a biological oscillator. The heart, by pumping blood, creates waves that rise up the spine and reverberate in the brain. These waves are not merely physiological but electromagnetic, vibrating in resonance with the unified field of the universe. When the heart rhythm stabilizes and breathing harmonizes, a standing wave pattern forms that connects the cerebral hemispheres. At this point, perfect synchrony emerges between body and field. The human being begins to operate in an expanded state of perception. This phenomenon, according to Bentov, is the first step toward liberation from the matrix. The system that controls the collective mind keeps people in predictable vibrational ranges because they are easier to manipulate. Emotions of fear, guilt, and scarcity reduce the amplitude of brain waves, limiting energy flow and blocking communication with higher levels of consciousness. The body becomes dense and perception narrow. But when vibration rises, consciousness breaks through the invisible walls, keeping it confined in material illusion. The individual begins to perceive that everything vibrates, that each emotion is a frequency, and that their own mind is capable of modulating it. Bentov saw the human being as a bridge between the physical world and the universal field. When the heart vibrates in harmony, consciousness aligns with the structure of the cosmos, and a new form of intelligence begins to operate. This intelligence does not express itself through linear thought but through intuition, an instantaneous, direct perception that dispenses with conventional reasoning. In this state, the observer becomes conscious of the very act of observing, and this alters reality. The simple fact of perceiving with attention changes the energetic field around oneself. The physics of consciousness reveals that the universe responds to the frequency of the observer. Everything one thinks, feels, and believes returns as an organized form of energy. The human being, then, ceases to be a victim of circumstances and becomes a conscious co-creator of their own experience. Bentov said that at this point, the universe begins to dialogue with the individual through synchronicities, seemingly random events that reveal a subtle intelligence guiding the expansion process. This understanding opens a door to a new way of existing. Reality ceases to be something that happens and becomes something that is constructed, vibration after vibration, choice after choice. The field of consciousness, once invisible, begins to be felt as a living, pulsating presence, interconnecting everything. And it is at this moment that Bentov's great revelation emerges, the perception that the universe itself is an immense hologram of consciousness, and that each human being carries within themselves the totality of this hologram, awaiting only awakening to recognize it. Bentov advanced a step further when he realized that consciousness and reality were not merely connected, they were different expressions of the same substance. He observed that the universe behaves like a hologram, a structure in which each fragment contains the totality of the whole. This means that human beings are not separate from creation but are a miniature of the cosmos itself, a living cell of the universal body. Everything that happens within an individual consciousness reflects and influences the larger field, just as the larger field shapes personal experiences. This understanding dissolved the boundary between observer and observed. The idea of a holographic universe was not just a spiritual metaphor. Bentov saw in it a precise description of the energetic functioning of reality. Each thought, emotion, and intention generates an interference pattern in the field of consciousness, and these patterns project what we call the physical world. Everything perceived is actually the result of a dance of waves intertwining, forming the illusion of matter, time, and space. The matrix operates precisely on this illusion, making the individual identify only with the projected image, forgetting they are the projector itself. When consciousness limits itself to sensory perception, the hologram appears solid and unquestionable. But when human beings turn inward and begin to expand mental frequency, they perceive that reality responds immediately to their vibrational state. The holographic field reorganizes according to the vibration that feeds it. Bentov affirmed that at this point, the individual begins to understand the divine nature of their own mind. They are not trapped within the universe manifests within them. This discovery completely transforms how life is understood. What was once seen as chance begins to reveal an ordering intelligence. Events are not random but reflections of internal patterns. Synchronicity becomes the language of cosmic consciousness, and each encounter, each challenge, each moment of pain begins to carry precise information for the evolutionary process. In this state of perception, separation dissolves. The person begins to feel that the other is an extension of themselves, that all forms of life vibrate within the same field, and that love is not merely a feeling but the force that keeps the hologram cohesive. Bentov used to say that the matrix feeds on the belief in separation. When the mind believes it is isolated, vulnerable, and disconnected from the source, it becomes manipulable. But when it recognizes it is a spark of the whole, it becomes sovereign. Reality ceases to be a prison and transforms into a mirror, reflecting, at each instant, the internal state of the observer. At this point, the search for truth ceases to be external and transforms into a dive into one's own energetic field. From this understanding, Bentov began to teach that the human body is the portal of access to this holographic universe. Each cell, each vibration, each flow of energy contains the memory of totality. And it is in this understanding that the next step emerges, discovering how this conscious biology can serve as an antenna to decode higher frequencies and translate the infinite into human experience. The human body was designed as a bridge between the visible and invisible. Each heartbeat, each subtle vibration traveling up the spine, carries codes of information linking matter to the field of consciousness. Within this living structure rest energy portals that translate frequencies from the universe into human experiences. These centers, known for millennia as chakras, are more than spiritual symbols. They are conversion points where consciousness manifests in form. When they flow in harmony, perception expands, intuition awakens, and the mind silences. When blocked, reality narrows and the soul feels disconnected from the source that sustains it. The system that imprisons consciousness knows this. That's why it stimulates humanity to remain focused outward, on consumption, comparison, the fear of not being enough. Constant focus on the material creates internal noise that prevents human beings from hearing their own energetic field. When silence is lost, the inner antenna stops capturing the subtlest frequencies, and the individual comes to believe they are merely a body that thinks, instead of a consciousness that vibrates. This is the matrix's most efficient trap, making the mind doubt its own divine nature. But when attention returns inward, something extraordinary happens. The energy sleeping at the base of the spine begins to move, gentle and intelligent. This force, known as Kundalini, is the principle of evolution awaiting the right moment to awaken. As it ascends, it travels through each energetic center, dissolving blockages and awakening dormant memories. The body responds with lightness, breathing changes, and a new vibration courses through each cell, as if life gains another density, another color, another meaning. At the top of the energetic system, the pineal gland acts as a portal of expanded perception. When this center awakens, inner vision opens and the individual begins to see beyond forms. Dense reality becomes translucent, and what once seemed solid begins to reveal itself as pure vibration. In this state, duality loses strength, time dilates, and the mind perceives that the external world is merely a reflection of the internal. Each thought, each emotion, each choice shapes the vibrational field around. Liberation does not occur through struggle but through attunement. The more human beings align with the flow of energy passing through them, the closer they come to universal harmony. Stillness becomes power and silence, wisdom. The body, once seen as a prison, reveals itself as the temple of expansion. Within it, the portals are always open, awaiting only consciousness's return to its axis. And it is in this state of alignment that a new understanding begins to emerge. The perception that life is only one of many manifestations of consciousness. When the body fulfills its role as a bridge and energy circulates freely, the soul prepares for the next stage. Understanding that what we call death is merely a frequency shift, a passage to a dimension where the observer continues to exist in its purest form. When vital energy completes its cycle within the physical body, something magnificent happens. What humanity calls death is not an end but a transition. It is the moment when consciousness, free from the limitations of matter, expands and returns to the original field from which it came. The body falls silent, but the observer remains fully awake. The flow that once circulated through subtle channels now releases itself, and perception expands in an indescribable way. Fear dissolves because what is lost is only form, not being. During this passage, consciousness traverses fields of light that are not symbolic but structural. They are living geometries, energy patterns forming the foundations of the universe. What appears as tunnels of light or portals is actually the architecture of hyperspace itself. Each form, each color, each pulsation carries information, and the soul understands everything instantaneously, without need for words. Time loses meaning, past and future merge, and everything reveals itself as a single moment of absolute presence. Many accounts of near-death experiences describe this instant with a clarity that transcends any rational explanation. The sensation of unity is so profound that the concept of I dissolves. Consciousness recognizes itself in everything, in sound, in light, in space, in every spark of existence. It is in this state that the being perceives that human life was merely a stage within a much larger process of learning and expansion. Nothing was in vain. Each emotion, each mistake, each joy formed the spiral that brought them there. The fear of death is the Matrix's last veil. It keeps human beings trapped in the idea that they are merely a body, that the loss of form means disappearance. This fear creates attachment, and attachment reinforces illusion. When the individual understands that consciousness is indestructible, that it continues to exist even when the body dissolves, something liberates within them. Love ceases to be a fragile feeling and comes to be recognized as the substance permeating all dimensions. Suffering transforms into wisdom, and pain into passage. Death is a mirror revealing what has always been hidden, the eternity of being. Each transition is an opportunity to recognize oneself beyond forms. When this understanding is integrated while still alive, fear dissolves and the human experience changes completely. The person begins to live with lightness, knowing that nothing can truly be lost. Everything is transformation. Everything is continuity. And it is precisely in this understanding that consciousness awakens to the greater purpose of existence, perceiving that life is a school for the expansion of spirit. Learning does not end with the last breath. It merely changes scenery, opening space for a new cycle of evolution. And it is at this point that the great choice emerges: to remain asleep in the cycle of repetition or to take command of one's own evolutionary journey, transcending the matrix once and for all. Each human being carries within themselves the seed of transcendence. This seed, silent and patient, awaits the moment when consciousness decides to flourish. When the gaze turns inward and fear begins to lose strength, the soul awakens to the understanding that life is a process of constant refinement. Nothing is static, nothing is definitive. Existence is movement, is frequency, is vibration. And in this field of infinite possibilities, everything responds to the choice of the observer. The journey of consciousness has always led human beings to a crucial point, the recognition that they are co-authors of their own reality. There is no fixed destiny, only lines of probability that align with each individual's predominant vibration. Thoughts, emotions, and intentions are creative forces, shaping the field and organizing experiences. When the mind frees itself from automatism and attention anchors in the present, energy reorganizes. The matrix loses strength because it only survives in the autopilot of unconsciousness. Each act of presence is a step outside this control. When someone chooses love instead of fear, trust instead of doubt, silence instead of reaction, they alter the energetic structure of their own field and, simultaneously, influence the collective field. This is the true meaning of evolution. Expanding vibration until the external world begins to reflect inner harmony. The revolution of consciousness does not happen in the streets but in the intimacy of each awakened being. It is silent, yet irresistible. The turning point occurs when the individual realizes they are no longer seeking answers but living the answers that have always been within them. The expansion of consciousness is not a distant event but a daily choice, the decision to observe with more clarity, to feel with more depth, to act with more purpose. Awakening is not a spiritual privilege, it is a natural return to what has always been. When a sufficient number of people begin to vibrate at this frequency, the fabric of reality changes. Control systems disintegrate because they depend on fear to exist. Humanity enters a new cycle, guided by lucidity and empathy. In this new state, human beings cease to be slaves to imposed narratives and become the storytellers of their own story. Freedom ceases to be an ideal and becomes a lived experience. And if this video reached you, it's because a part of you is already awakening to this calling. The vibration of seeking does not attract chance. Everything that resonates with truth finds its way to the observer who is ready. The question that remains now is not about the reality of the matrix, but about the courage to traverse it. Awakening has begun, and the next step depends only on your choice. Everything revealed up to this point is not merely knowledge, it is a reminder. Awakening does not begin when the world changes but when consciousness decides to see the world with new eyes. What you do from this moment defines the course of your own evolution. Each thought, each emotion, and each choice is a frequency that builds the reality surrounding you. The power to exit the matrix is not in fighting against it, but in ceasing to feed it with fear, distraction, and self-forgetfulness. Now that you understand that consciousness is the field that creates form, ask yourself, what are you projecting today? Are you vibrating in tune with expansion or still repeating the patterns you learned to call normal life? Liberation begins when human beings commit to living awake, attentive, lucid, connected to what is real within themselves. Don't wait for the world to change yourself. Become the point of transformation that alters the field around you. Observe your breathing, cultivate silence, choose love amid the noise. It is in these subtle gestures that consciousness breaks through the walls of illusion. If this message resonated with you, it's a sign that your frequency has already begun to change. So continue this journey. Expand knowledge, deepen your gaze, and share this vibration with those who are also ready to awaken. Leave in the comments, which part of the video moved you the most? And if you want to continue exploring the mystery of consciousness, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, so you'll receive each new content that can accelerate your own awakening. The matrix loses strength every time a human being awakens. Perhaps this is your moment to cross the veil and choose freedom.